Yes, sir.
I wonder if you could say just a little bit about the Department of Peace. Since we've never had it, it's a little hard to imagine, well, how does it function? How does it work? So if you could just say a little bit about that, please.
In 1999, as a member of the Democratic caucus, I watched Democrats rush to support President Clinton's plan to bomb Serbia. And it was really interesting. I mean, I was aware that Madeleine Albright had given Milosevic a non-negotiable demand that he really give up power and allow his country to be taken over. And so the drumbeat of war started. They proceeded to bomb Serbia. And it was interesting to see this as a social phenomenon. I saw people who were ordinarily placid people suddenly get swept up by the fervor of war. It's something interesting to watch. It's almost as if there's some resonance that war has with our lower limbic system that excites it and causes us to be energized and feel the pulsation of war, and we're drawn towards it almost magnetically. I saw this happen because I stood in the Democratic caucus and saw people who were ordinarily placid, mild, meek souls. Yeah, war. So that caused me to think about the dynamic of war. So I started to study war in the 20th century. I found out that over 1 million, over 100 million innocent people died in wars in the 20th century. Most of them innocent civilian non-combatants. I remember taking the road in the early 90s from Sheremetyevo Airport outside of Moscow into the city of Moscow. And I saw these big iron girders about halfway down the road that stand on the side of the road at the place where the Russians blocked the advance of the German army. And Russia lost something on the order of 30 million. You think of how people, who is it that gets destroyed in these wars? Iraq, a million innocent non-combatants. And so I started to think about the human impact of war, and I started to think about what type of thinking produces war. What are the cultural aspects and elements of war? And so that led me to go deep into this issue and to come up with some tentative conclusions that related to our country. I looked at violence in America. I looked at violence in the home. We don't often talk about this. Domestic violence. I've got a book out, by the way. It's called The Courage to Survive. And it's about my family in the first 21 years growing up in the inner city. And any of you who have been from big families, although the families don't have to be that big, you know the kind of stuff that can happen inside a home. The domestic violence that goes on in a home. You don't hear about that much. But it's a fact of life in a lot of American homes. And I write about this. And when you realize how people get damaged by that, domestic violence, spousal abuse, child abuse. Think of our society now. Violence in the schools, racial violence, gang violence, gun violence, violence against gays, police community clashes. We have symptomatologies of violence in our society that are rarely addressed in total. We only address them after the fact. But the tisk-tisk that goes on in news reports, or in courtrooms, or at funerals. So I started to think about this. I thought, what if we actually took all this talent that exists in our society, sociologists, psychologists, and counselors, and teachers, and doctors, and nurses, and pastors, and people from every walk of life, and created an organized approach as a society where we can actually teach children, right from the beginning, principles of nonviolence. What do you do when you're a child and somebody hits you? This is one of those fundamental encounters. What does a child do? What do we teach a child to do when someone says something bad to them? How do you handle that? See, if we begin at the earliest age to teach our children, and if we have programs available for families that are having great difficulty, I can only imagine what it's like inside of millions of American homes right now, where there's so much instability financially, where people don't have enough money for food on the table, are worried about the next rent or mortgage payment, don't have the money for health care, can't send the kids to schools, price of energy is going up, home heating oil going up, price of gasoline going up, and I would imagine that there's families just getting unraveled. Well, the Department of Peace would provide services where people, if they needed help, counseling, for emotional or any other kind of stress that's going on, they get help. It's a compassionate approach. It's not about pointing a finger, it's not about blaming anyone, but it's about teaching peace and nonviolence. It's also on an international level, providing the president with another tool of nonviolent conflict resolution that you use so maybe you wouldn't have to offer troops in a conflict. You could look at things when they're percolating. Because by the time you need troops, it's generally out of control. So what do you do when it's just starting to build? So I've given a lot of thought to this. You know, when you grow up the oldest of 7, in an inner city family that moved around 21 different places by the time I was 17, including a couple of cars, you start to get an idea that maybe it's good to work for peace. So, you know, and finally, what's innermost becomes outermost. I can stand here and advocate for peace on earth. And actually, it's pretty easy to do that. But the trick is try to advocate it for your own life. It's a lot easier. Try to do it in your own relationships. That's a whole different deal, really. I mean, we have to be compassionate about it. You know, I mean, my wife and I talk about this a lot. But when we're involved in a discussion, we know we have to be careful about how far you go. You know, in challenging each other, because there's a point at which you got to be careful. You got to respect each other's feelings. So when you start to become sensitive to that, then you can talk about peace with some degree of authenticity. But everyone knows the hymn, let there be peace on earth, let it begin with me. What's innermost becomes outermost. And this is something that, as our country thinks about it, we take a new direction in the world. That we don't, you know, we don't have to be in this downward spiral where we're doomed to destruction. You know, we can be made and are made to evolve to something that is beautiful, that is love and life. And that's where I'm coming from.